Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into something that's honestly a bit challenging, but absolutely crucial. Today, we're holding up a mirror to our own hearts. We so often think community breakdown is just a structural issue, right? But our sources point to something way more fascinating. It's actually about our hidden internal barriers. So, we're going to conduct a little internal audit and examine the quiet, hidden motives that literally destroy genuine community.
But hey, before we look at what breaks the community, we really need to define the baseline of spiritual health. The text defines true brotherly kindness or mutual affection, and let me tell you, this is way more than just being polite or saying hi in passing. It's defined as familial love, a deep warmth and an active goodwill extended toward your community and your neighbors. It requires motion. It requires real action.
So here is our roadmap for the Explainer. We just defined brotherly kindness, and next we'll move through three big internal barriers: the trap of comfort, the illusion of image, and the poison of pride. Then we'll wrap up with embracing genuine mutual affection. All right, let's hit our first major barrier: the trap of comfort, or as it's sometimes called, the lust of the flesh. I think we've all experienced this dopamine hijack. It's wild how much massive energy we spend on shallow validation. Our capacity for deep affection gets totally hijacked by this craving for immediate emotional validation and just, transactional connections. We eagerly chase the cheap, easy hits of likes, casual attention, flattery. But then there's this tiny sliver left for gritty, emotional investment. The exact moment a neighbor faces heavy adversity. It's kind of tragic how quickly we experience internal panic and just completely withdraw. And this is a sharp contrast to the wisdom of Proverbs 17:17, which tells us that a brother is born for a time of adversity. True brotherly kindness, it demands a long, unreturned emotional investment. It means staying anchored when there's absolutely no immediate payoff. Which, let's be honest, goes entirely against our modern craving for low-stakes, easy interactions.
So we really have to ask ourselves, when someone in our community actually requires time and sacrifice, are we abandoning our commitments just to chase quick distractions that keep our own emotions nice and comfortable? Or are we willing to stay anchored and actually love them through the crisis?
This brings us to a pretty harsh reality, perfectly illustrated in Luke 10 with the priest and the Levite. Just like them, when we see someone in desperate need, we often view their messy, disruptive brokenness as a direct threat to our personal routine. We intentionally pass by on the other side because, frankly, we just refuse to let our hands get dirty or our plans get altered. So the crucial point is this: is your goodwill just a theoretical concept? It's incredibly easy to love the idea of community. But this exposes whether that goodwill completely vanishes the exact second real-world service demands your personal sacrifice and inconvenience. The text pushes this even further, bringing in Hebrews 10:25. It argues that we actively withdraw from meeting together and caring for each other because we harbor this deep terror of emotional exhaustion. To avoid the hard internal friction of showing genuine concern, we end up coddling our own energy. We offer only superficial pleasantries so we can remain safely, comfortably detached. It forces us to take a hard look and ask if we're valuing our own safe, self-contained emotional equilibrium over the command to genuinely love our family. Are we just retreating into self-protection, or are we actually looking past our own interests here? Moving right along to part 2, the illusion of image, also known as the lust of the eyes. There's a fascinating and honestly kind of brutal visual hypocrisy at play here. On one hand, we have how it looks to you, where we selectively filter our kindness, evaluating people based entirely on whether they look attractive, influential, or useful to us. But on the other hand, we have how it looks to others, where we put on this loud theatrical display of digital empathy, purely to manage our public reputation. Proverbs 28 tells us that a person will do wrong for a mere piece of bread. Are we compromising our integrity for that piece of bread by showing wicked favoritism? We have to ask if we're ignoring the inherent worth of the broken, the plain, and the overlooked people around us, and only extending goodwill to those who look like a valuable addition to our carefully curated lives. The perfect antidote to this is found in 1 John 3:18. It reminds us to love not just with words, but with actions and in truth. Our sources argue that we often care way more about projecting a decorative image to our followers than actually performing the quiet, hidden sacrifices that real goodwill requires. This leaves us with a really piercing question. Do we just value looking like a servant in the sight of men, hungry for that social validation, while our actual hands remain completely idle before God? And that brings us to our third and final barrier, the poison of pride, or the pride of life. According to the text, pride dismantles mutual affection in three distinct ways. We've got false dignity and status, arrogance and self-reliance, and finally, competitive superiority. Let's break these down. First up, dignity. In John 13, we see a Savior who literally stripped off his garments to serve the broken by washing their feet. Yet we so often abandon our neighbor the exact moment love requires us to step down from our own perceived worth. We completely rebel against this downward trajectory of service, viewing the raw, unglamorous needs of others as a threat to our social standing. It's definitely worth asking yourself, do you carry a false sense of status? Do we feel entirely too important to perform the lowest tasks of community service? Are we only willing to practice brotherly kindness when it can be done from a nice, comfortable position of authority and respectability? Now, let's see how this builds into the second manifestation, arrogance. Galatians 6 clearly commands us to carry each other's burdens, but if we're too wrapped up in our own self-reliance and personal goals, we'll never slow down to do it. The arrogant assumption that your personal destiny is simply too important to be interrupted by someone else's collapse, well, it completely isolates you. This self-important posture tricks us into dictating terms to people, rather than walking submissively alongside them in their mess. Does prideful independence convert your community into nothing more than a passive background for your own self-directed success story? Finally, we face superiority. Romans 12 urges us to associate with people of low position and avoid conceit. But instead of living in mutual affection, the text points out that we often use the moral struggles and financial instabilities of others as a flattering backdrop for ourselves. We weaponize our clean choices and stable lifestyles to highlight our own spiritual elitism, just looking down on the hurting. This requires some deep, honest self-reflection. Have you turned brotherly kindness into a condescending project? Actually, scratch that. Have we transformed a family that was intended for shared brokenness into a toxic theater just to feed our own ego and competitive status? As we wrap up this explainer, the internal audit is complete, and the results definitely demand an answer. So I'll leave you with this final, uncompromising choice based on everything we've uncovered today. Will you continue to protect your comfort, aggressively curate your image, and proudly defend your ego? Or will you tear down these internal barriers, stop passing by on the other side, and finally step down into the beautifully messy reality of true brotherly kindness? The choice is entirely yours.